While I'm here, I'm going to discuss what I think would be the origin of a lot of the Protestant and evangelical churches that came into existence in the 1500s or later. It seems to me that almost all of these groups were at least partly derived from the fact that these people disagreed with the official Catholic teaching regarding the Lord's Supper. The Catholic teaching says that the bread and wine are transformed into Christ's body and flesh when the Lord's Supper is properly performed. And almost all the Protestant groups, evangelicals, disagreed with that notion. And I think I can see what was going on here. Ever since the early days of Catholicism and early days of Christianity, there were probably certain people that felt that the Catholic doctrine was too literal. They could not believe that the bread and wine would literally turn into Christ's flesh and blood. And for hundreds of years, people like this stayed in the Catholic Church, at least in an official manner. They would be nominal Catholics, or they might have thought of themselves as devout Catholics, but they did not like this doctrine regarding the Lord's Supper. And I can see why some people would have a problem with it. For example, if you get somebody, he sees that the Lord's Supper has been eaten by rats or infidels or destroyed by fire after the bread and wine had been blessed. And he sees that happening, and he thinks to himself, there's no way that Christ would allow his body and blood to be destroyed by rats and infidels and fire and things like that. So the person would start thinking that there must be some other explanation regarding the Lord's Supper. So some people adopted what would eventually become the Lutheran idea, which basically says that Christ's flesh and blood become present along with the bread and wine, and that this presence of Christ occurs when the bread and wine enter the believer's mouth instead of happening at some earlier period. That way they could get around this occurrence where rats or infidels or fire or something like that would consume Christ's body and blood. And other people inside the Catholic Church had a more radical idea, which would serve as the basis for the Baptist and Pentecostal notions, which say that the bread and wine are mere symbols of Christ's flesh and blood. This way they could completely avoid the notion that Christ's body and blood would be destroyed in an irreverent manner. And I can see why it would be hard for somebody to believe that Christ's body and blood could be out there where it could be destroyed by rats or fire or infidels or something like that. But what people have to understand, though, is that the Catholic teaching does not say that Christ is being harmed or being re-crucified by the fact that his body and blood are being consumed in this supernatural manner. It's not as if these things become Christ's flesh and blood in the normal manner where it would still have the characteristics of flesh and blood. It's not as if the rats or fire are ripping Christ apart when they eat the Lord's Supper or consume the Lord's Supper. And so it does not do irreverence to Christ. And besides, if you look at Christ's statements in the Bible, it doesn't say anything like this bread and wine symbolize my body and blood, and it doesn't say anything like my body and blood become present, or that the bread and wine become accompanied by my flesh and blood. It was clear he was talking about the bread and wine itself, and not that Christ's presence would become intermixed among them. But in another way, the bread and wine do remain present in the sense that the aspects or attributes that are normally associated with bread and wine remain present. So in a scientific sense, the bread and wine would still be present because scientifically we would define things by these attributes, which are known as aspects. But in some way it becomes Christ's flesh and blood simply because of the miracle that occurs, and yet it cannot be detected. And this would would go along with what the Bible says. And then there are passages in the Bible where it talks about the seriousness regarding eating the bread and wine after they have been blessed and after they have become Christ's flesh and blood. And we don't see that kind of seriousness in regard to mere symbols. And so that's why I can sympathize with the people who have a hard time believing the Catholic theory regarding the Lord's Supper. And yet I believe that the Bible and historic Christian tradition show that the Catholic view is the right one. The other views don't, they're just problems with it based on the text. For one thing, if somebody says that the bread and wine symbolize Christ's body and blood, I would have to ask how it is that bread and wine could symbolize somebody's flesh and blood. I could see how a crucifix or a statue might symbolize some person, but bread and wine do not have the characteristics that I would associate with human. And also, if it did symbolize Christ, it would seem that the best thing to do would be to display the bread and wine as a way of displaying Christ, the way somebody might do with a portrait that represents Christ. But instead, the Bible says to eat these things. It doesn't say to display them just so people can look at it and remember Christ. So they would be more than just symbols. And why would somebody want to eat a symbol of Christ's flesh and blood, or drink a symbol of Christ's blood? That wouldn't make much sense. It'd be kind of like eating a crucifix or a cross or a portrait of Christ. And I don't know any group that's doing that kind of thing.